everyone. Welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Douville. I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who can't cross the drawbridge without falling into its moats,
Tim Longo. Yeah, that drawbridge is pretty misleading, huh? I remember that immediately. It's like, the drawbridge isn't logical. It's just pixel-based. So,
yep. One of the first comments on the stream was, I fell in the water in the first 10 seconds of the game and died. I was like, so did I. So we're introducing a new game this time. I want to give you the honors because it's one from your own past.
Yep. We're playing King's Quest 1. What's the subtitle? An Air Quest for the Crown. Yeah, that's this first one. Yeah, King's Quest 1. So Sierra Online is the company, and for me specifically, the Sierra games, as well as the LucasArts adventure games, but the Sierra games really first were some of my earliest, fondest memories of just gaming in general. And I mentioned this last episode, but I had obviously 2600 as well, and I had fond memories of that, and they're kind of similar eras. But I ended up ultimately becoming a PC gamer after kind of getting into this stuff, and then getting into some RPGs, and we've talked about Goldbox and those sorts of things. But for whatever reason, the Sierra games, as punishing as they are, ended up being
we'll get to that.
Yeah, we definitely will. And Sierra ended up being kind of like that go-to company for me that I kind of dedicated and bought like all of their stuff. And we mentioned this last episode too, they became kind of top of the food chain for a long time too, because they were coming out with a lot of different games, all generally in a similar genre of a graphic adventure game, which we'll talk a lot about with this one. And there goes the dog.
Hello, dogs.
Yeah, hello, dogs. Just in the other room. Yeah, so the graphic adventure game became sort of my genre, and we talked, I think, during the Day of the Tentacle of sort of like what does it mean the fall of the adventure game, and it kind of has it risen back up or not, etc. But this was the genre that really dominated for a long time, both with Sierra and LucasArts kind of being the two big competitors. But the funny thing that I think we'll talk a lot about is that the formula for the two games is very different. And they evolved. Sierra evolved over time, but not like, I would say, with leaps and bounds. They definitely started changing some things as the industry started changing, but their sort of core formula, though it got more usable over time, was really kind of, you see the underpinnings of it in this first game. The first big one, as you're going to mention, Wizard and the Princess was one that Roberta Williams also.
Yeah, some others, from earlier. My only contact really with Sierra is through an earlier game called, as you mentioned, Wizard and the Princess. Although you can see some of the hallmarks, I think, in terms of a parser and all of that stuff, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on. So I have really no feel for these games at all. When I was growing up, a lot of what I was able to get my hands on, I got through piracy, which was really, really easy in the 1980s. And also because there weren't game stores. It was very difficult actually to get software. I wouldn't have even known where to begin to get the games. So it was kind of
I was all about Egghead. And did you ever use it, or was Egghead maybe not just a West Coast thing? I don't know.
I was in New Hampshire.
Yeah, you were. Not accessible.
I'm happy we had internal plumbing.
Oh boy!
But finding a game store in there wasn't one in the town I grew up in. There was in a neighboring town, but I didn't know that until much later. So yes, it was just difficult and everything was sort of passed around, and often things were cracked or cracked badly. But that was Wizard and the Princess was a game that I do believe I legitimately owned. Now that I think about it, I remember it having the sticker on it with the actual, image of the title. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so we'll get into that a bit. It is also it's among the first games I ever finished, and it involved a phone call to their hint line. So that because for one section in particular, and that if that hint line were around today, I'd probably be calling it for this game. But again, we'll get to the sort of difficulty and things like that. I did dig up a little bit about this game in terms of its development. It was funded by IBM. So their original games were sold, I believe, primarily on the Apple II. And yeah, using Fortran, apparently. Weird. So they developed these original games for the Apple II, and then IBM was coming out with the PC Junior, which was meant to sort of get into the same market the Apple II had. And so in 1983, they developed the game as well as a whole system around it to support the PC Junior and add more sound capability, basically, than was available on the Apple II, and maybe a distinguishing characteristic of the hardware. So they had the chance to sort of do all that and have somebody else pay for it, which is kind of ideal because they were going to also pay royalties and basically just try to put themselves on the map and buy their way in. Of course, IBM, being a huge company, could really just have the pockets deep enough to take it to Apple if they wanted to. And I guess they sort of decided to try with the PC Junior. I don't remember that being a particular success. I don't even remember why. But it's a very recognizable product. You go and look at a picture of PC Junior, you're like, oh yeah, I remember those. Mm-hmm. But they really kind of pushed a lot of different technical things that we won't probably go into, but kind of a neat early system. And maybe a little expensive. I don't really know, but anyway.
Well, I was just going to say, like, the other element of this era, kind of based on the computer, because I think I played this on an Apple or a IBM clone, which was the AT&T 6300. I just have this vivid memory of it. And I remember my dad and I, when we got a 4-color CGA, that was probably CGA, right?
CGA, yeah.
4-color card for the computer that we put in, kind of jury-rigged it in there. And then, Sierra Games just came to life because we had this new video card.
Amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, I had forgotten about the IBM backing. I'm kind of looking at the same stuff you're looking at. And then this was also their first game that they kind of wrote this engine for, it looks like. I don't know if an adventure game interpreter is
a new engine. I mean, any game back then, any company was probably trying to build tools at the same time as they were building their game, and that carried on for a long, long time. It's less common today just because of the scale of games, but and there's just a lot more engine licensing, a model that has come and gone and come and gone. Mm-hmm. But for this one, they would have been developing the engine at the same time. We were talking pre-show about Out of This World, and that was similarly developed in that way. But at the same time that this came out, the same year this came out, Karateka was developed, and that would have been a game where he was figuring out how to rotoscope. I mean, there was just so much going on at this time in terms of figuring out key techniques for what would be at least another decade of games, and maybe more like 15 years until 3D really started to take hold. Many of the techniques were as to how you built software for games at this time, including reusable engines, were really being developed. Because having come from the arcades, now being on PCs, arcades, of course, had dedicated hardware for the specific games that they were running. And there may have been some ability to reuse there, and they were, in some cases, a little more general purpose. But the further back you go, the less common that is. The more specific hardware is built for a particular game. And that's for a number of reasons, involving pure performance, and also just not really knowing how to do this stuff yet. I mean, computers are still being figured out really in the mid 70s, and figuring out how to do those sorts of things all together. So there are some interesting things in the early tech going on here. And I feel like for the type of game developers that they were, you have to remember Ken and Roberta Williams were the founders. He was the engineer. He was the programmer, and she was coming up with the stories and the designs. And they basically split along that. And their early success allowed them to staff up a little bit. But that probably would have been more programmers than anything else. In any case, he would have been looking to find ways to leverage the work that he had done so that they wouldn't have to keep doing that every time.
Yeah.
And free him up for doing more of the business side of things, et cetera, et cetera. Well, she would have been looking for, I just need a tool set to put my vision in place. So that's a model that would carry on for a long time as well.
Yeah. And I just remember like being sort of infatuated with this concept that Sierra was in. They were in California at the time, Oakhurst, California, and they were always looking for play testers, and it was my first run-in with a kind of a local-ish company that was being very successful, and they had a string to your point about their kind of base engine, Space Quest, Police Quest, Leisure Suit Larry. There was just a string of franchises that they invested in, and they just were kind of unstoppable in a lot of ways, and they just kept going. And they started branching out. I don't know if you remember, but Dynamics was a sort of a subsidiary of theirs for a while, and they started doing some more action-y games. And then it all, eventually down the road, I think Vivendi, right, took over, bought it all. But long after Ken and Roberta,
somebody bought it. I don't think it was Vivendi. I think it was actually
Vivendi.
CUC International bought all of it at an awful lot. But
didn't Vivendi ended up with it, and then they sold it, and then Activision ends up with it now.
Right. I think by the time Vivendi was getting involved, it was more of a brand name.
Yeah.
Already. Yeah. It would have been Havas. I don't know if you remember Havas. That was kind of that was the French thing. And then Vivendi wasn't until 2000. So yeah, they had pretty much the Williams were gone by the time.
The Williams were gone they were long gone at that point, but they were sort of, and also for me personally, because I wasn't as focused on maybe console games or really getting into who was developing this stuff, Roberta Williams and Ken and the two guys from Andromeda that basically designed and created the Space Quest series, like those were my sort of, my superstar game developers that I knew of, right? I knew their names. And I also have, to your point about like, where do you find these things? Like there were a couple boutique gaming, PC gaming stores that sold just a few pieces of software that I just remember going in and just, oh man, it was just Christmas every time I went in there, and it was just seeing what new games were coming out, and I would just go to these PC games or these PC stores and buy games directly. So I had access, and
for me it was more about going to like a B. Dalton or some other bookstore chain and going and finding their programming section and seeing if I could find anything for the Apple II.
Right.
I mean, I started that early with that sort of thing. So, because I would have started programming in 1980, I believe. And, but yes, I mean, for me too, this stuff was just kind of amazing, that you could sort of create these worlds. And I mean, this is really early stuff for us. And I guess I hadn't even realized until the last couple of years that Sierra had made Wizard and the Princess, which was certainly the first graphical adventure I ever played, and one of the first few adventures of any kind that I had played. Before that, I had played a couple text adventures, Zork and Advent, which was pretty heavily the precursor to Zork. So, And I may have played one other Infocom game before that, but again, it was, and then I started getting into Ultimas and things like that as well. So again, though, whatever I could get my hands on through my network of people who I don't even know where they got them, but maybe they had dads who were bringing the games home, but we weren't. So yeah, an interesting time, and very, very early time for me.
Well, and then as you mentioned a couple of them already, but to talk about some of the games of the era coming out of this time, sequel to Castle Wolfenstein, Beyond Wolfenstein, which is pre all that's sort of more of a stealth action game. If people have ever seen that, I remember playing that
top down.
Yeah. You mentioned Karateka, Tetris. You said was this year, right?
Tetris was this year as well.
Excite Bike. Was another one that I saw that was blowing my mind. I can't find it now.
Marble Madness was
Madness.
And we were talking about, I played
Montezuma's Revenge. I remember playing and then the other weird thing is that this was also still in that time when there was this weird cross pollination of, because I'm looking at this list and it's a combination of Commodore 64 games, arcade games. There wasn't, it's just a different. The identity of the games industry was still trying to figure itself out. Ancient Art of War. Yeah, I remember that one. Shoot. And Ball Blazer. You mentioned Ball Blazer too.
An Archon sequel. I don't know if you remember Archon.
No. Oh yes, yeah. There was
fantasy chess, basically.
Yeah.
kind of a weird. You'd go and you'd take a space on the board, and then you'd have to actually have a battle. And then the other one we mentioned was Ball Blazer, which was an early LucasArts title. I don't think the first LucasArts title. No,
that might have been Pegasus. It's up there though. I forget, or it might have not been either of those. I don't remember, but yeah, really, that Ball Blazer was early though. Yeah. Funny time. But I mean, getting into the game itself, like graphic adventure, as a concept, right? And the other one of the things that I don't know if we want to just jump into sort of like what were some of your experiences kind of starting this game off? What are some of the surprises that you?
So the first and biggest surprise was I started knowing it was a parser game. I started typing in what direction to move.
Oh, right, of course.
Because I didn't know what else to do. And then I started trying using WASD, and then the more common variant at the time on the Apple II anyway would have been IJKL. Was my first WASD was IJKL because there was no mouse. So you're using your dominant hand on the keyboard to control things. That's how I played games like Lode Runner. So I was sitting there going, okay, well, I'm 5 seconds in the game. I have no idea what to do. Ultimately, if I came across the arrow keys, I tried those, I guess, third, and he just started moving. Actually, you know what? The more surprising thing, I'm actually gonna step back from that, because the more surprising thing was I actually read the manual.
Yeah, right.
So it was actually before I even jumped into the game.
Yeah.
And with this one, I was definitely like, well, I'm going to read this manual because this is ancient. And I'm really not going to know what the heck to do with myself if I don't read up a little bit. And what really surprised me was there's basically no direction as to how to play the game in the manual. It's all just setting the scene for what's happened. I'm almost certain there's some clues in there. It's deliberately seeding your brain with some ideas of what you might need to do. Although I haven't teased any of them out yet. Yeah. And then finally, there's sort of a little bit of player skill teaching in terms of like, when you play these sorts of games, here's how you want to make a map.
Yeah. I had forgotten about that. Yeah, but that looking at that,
it's an abstract thing. You want to make circles and then lines to connect things. So I started doing that, and of course, I didn't realize the structure of the world, so we'll get to that as well. And I ended up going all over the place on my paper and going to another page. And I mean, just like
my map
a mess.
is a mess. Yeah.
Yes, mine's terrible. I'll probably be restarting this game, which I think you probably have to do anyway at a certain point, because it's a very easy game to fail, and we'll get to this, but yes, those were the two experiences I had that were just surprising entirely. Like, I didn't expect them in the least. I had no idea that I was going to have I have no commands. There's no help. There's nothing as far as what you can type. And then the mapping thing, and then finally getting in and starting typing things that I'm used to typing in these sorts of games, going back to my Wizard and the Princess time, and being totally lost until I struck upon the arrow keys and promptly walked into the moat.
Yeah. And if you use, you might have found this, but if you use the number pad, you can use diagonals as well.
I did not, because I've been using a fancy keyboard. That's
right. You probably didn't have
RSI, and it doesn't have a number pad. Right. It has function keys or something, so I can make a number pad, but then I would be turning off the letters.
And did you find?
I probably want those more. Did
you find jump and all that stuff too?
I did. Yeah.
They have that kind of in the menu. They have a little bit of cheat there. I can't remember. I feel like it's a good point, and I was also surprised by what the manual had in it. I feel like maybe there was a quick start card that came with these games that is not with the GOG version. Maybe we're missing. I have a vague memory of that. I kind of naturally, just instinctually fell right into it again, I think. I remember some puzzles, but definitely not all of them, clearly. But just the kind of the moving around and the walking around, just kind of coming back to that. And the parser is just so fascinating to me now, going back so many years later and playing it, and just things like, not to dive into specifics yet, but things like, what's an example that I wrote down? Let me see. Like, you can add just specific. Let's see. What's the? Look in something versus looking at something. You know what I mean? And then that's a distinction. You can look at the hole, and then it'll say something, and it's random. Or and then look in the keyhole, and then it'll actually, it'll have.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So I didn't find that. So, I mean, I already know that there's a lot that I need to learn about this game, and I did not get that. That makes sense though, because I there's a number of screens where there are things like holes or trunks or logs that are on their side, and I'm like, I know that there's something there.
Yeah.
But using.
You're gonna. Oh man. So have you looked anything up yet? Have you been kind of going dry? Or
no, I've done absolutely no puzzling. I got to like a score of 20, which is a whole nother thing too. Is a game with a score.
I forgot completely about the score.
That was not uncommon at the time.
No.
Zork certainly has a score, and Advent had a score. And I mean, technically speaking, a lot of these games would have been very. Like, how you actually made these games in terms of the parser would have been a fairly easy to understand thing, because source code was available. The way that Advent worked, which is Colossal Cave Adventure, was shared from system to system. I don't even know how they got it around, but it was shared basically as source, because a lot of programs at that time were interpreted. So you could actually look and see how Will Crowther or Don Woods implemented the parser, which was actually fairly ingenious. I've read the source in the last 10 years. And at the time, it would have been kind of a marvel and how much they squeezed out of the machine. And so individual programmers would hack their own stuff into those early games. I have to imagine, I know that Ken had something of a corporate background as a programmer, as anybody would have at that time.
I thought he maybe came from IBM.
Yes, he was. You're right.
Yeah.
He was from IBM. So definitely, yeah, he was. He
kind of enterprise programming.
I mean, he almost certainly, because those games would have run on those servers, those machines. He almost certainly would have had the opportunity to peek into them and see how they worked. So it's kind of interesting. I wonder.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody's ever asked him that. But that certainly could have done that at the time. And those things are super compact. They're really kind of software marvels in terms of how much they pack into a fairly small space.
Well, and I think the thing, that always, and I don't know if this is why the Sierra games ended up being the, as you say, marvel for me, and the ones that I really gravitated to, is because of the parser. And of course, at that time as a kid, I didn't really understand any of this stuff. I mean, you were already programming or whatever, and I was just playing, so I didn't really kind of grok it. But when you compare, though, I think it's easy to say that the LucasArts games from a verb perspective are more quote unquote usable. The flexibility and kind of like the craziness of having a parser in an adventure game at the same time was super fascinating to me. This concept that I could actually type, in my head at the time was like, well, I can type anything I want, and maybe actually it works.
Well, and you can. I mean, it's a very limited set of what will work, but you can literally type whatever you want, and you are. I mean, a big part of the game is finding the edges of that, which is something that I think got carried forward in both text adventures of the time, and even today. If you go and play, there's still a sort of a hobbyist text adventure. There's no market for it, but there is still a vibrant scene for text adventure games, and they are figuring out different ways to use text and the parser, even using the same parsers from back then, the Infocom parser, the latest version of it, to find different ways to play on verbs. And I mean, it gets a little bit more meta, I think, as naturally it will be after 40 years or whatever. But
interesting.
But yeah, it is. It's amazing it really is such a vibrant format. And I know that it's not probably something that people who are significantly younger than us really will find approachable. But when that's where you start, and you're able to go in and, like you say, have this very free world where you feel like you can do anything, and a couple of sentences of text paint a whole picture in your brain. And here you're reinforced by this real-time character moving around. It really is quite something, and kind of intoxicating.
Well, and then the sense of discovery with that parser too, that you have these surprising moments where you think to yourself, what if I type this? What will it actually know what to do? And at the time, again, like I said, at the time, I wasn't dissecting this stuff as a developer or thinking about that. I was just amazed that it would even respond somewhat coherently to an idea that I had, right? Let alone some of the verbs that you end up using. Sometimes I think maybe even one time. I'm sorry to tell you that you like.
I'm not surprised at all. Not in the least.
But my point, though not terrible on the usability scale, there's this sense of like amazement when you do it, and you're like, "What? It's letting me do this?" You know what I mean? And then it just unlocks this whole other thing. And it just blew my mind at the time, and they just rode that wave for all of their games for many, many years, that concept. And the weird thing is that the industry kind of got more usable around them, and as they were doing that, and they kind of had to, they had to evolve. But just at the time, just this concept. And though I played Zork and I played some of those text adventures, I'm such a visual person. I never got fully deeply embedded into that, subgenre. And when these graphical adventures started coming out, that's where the sort of the sort of everything came together for me. Because I guess just because I'm so visual, I needed that extra thing, but I still loved having the parser part of it as well, and seeing that visual feedback was really interesting. But then the other thing that I just completely forgot about this game is essentially the discovery-based basically open world aspect of it, and this concept of exploring with the parser. And like you said, I think you put it really well, of kind of testing the boundaries of what you can do. And I mean, those are things that the great games of today do, in different ways. Yeah. And I totally forgot about that from coming back to this game. And there are some underpinnings here for things that are deep in our development psyche, at least mine, that I forgot completely about.
Yeah, I actually want to sort of take that as well and talk a little bit about, because we've been dancing around LucasArts a little bit as becoming the more dominant form of adventure game a little bit later than this, obviously, maybe 10 years on. But one of the things that I was also reminded in playing a game like this is that I think the best way I can explain it is by analogy. When people think of filmed animation, naturally they tend to think of Disney, or did 20 years ago, and now they might think of Pixar. But let's just say you're a child of the 80s like us. And you think Disney when you think animation, but the fact is there's more than one style of animation, and it's often a matter of taste as to what you respond to, and Disney films aren't the only way to make animation, and I sort of feel that way approaching this one, which is pretty imposing, because there's not a lot of UX help. Yeah. But that's also, a lot of the experience is very much a taste experience. The idea that you can die and just lose your progress from whatever point, and basically have to puzzle things out and maybe just restart a game because now you've figured out, actually, okay, I need to go to the fairy godmother and then immediately do this because I know that's a thing. I can tell. But that's not a thing that would be in a LucasArts game. And
I see that,
because LucasArts games, you can never lose them. And that's become kind of the dominant, really across video games for the most part, the LucasArts model of gaming. Yeah. In adventure
closed
games
circuit
has
logic.
Really been closer, but also just no stop progression. There's no way to lose most games. You look at a Ubisoft game, and they're safe. Exactly. There's no jagged edges, and there are exceptions. And of course, we talk a ton about them. And I even mentioned on the stream there's a sort of Dark Souls like feeling to this Sierra game.
That's hilarious
because.
Yeah. It's punishing.
Because it's punishing. You have to go and explore the world and be willing to just say, okay, well, I learned something that time. Let me start over and do all this stuff I've seen again, because really none of that stuff is tracked. The fact that you've gone to a screen or not is mostly not tracked, except for a few cases where there's a character or something like that. Mostly it's, I've built up this map. Now I can use this map efficiently. Like I played for 2 hours last night, and at the end of it, I had a score of 20, which is maybe a 10th of the total score of the game, and a map. And I was really happy. I have a pretty decent map.
Yeah.
That's not bad for the first playthrough, right? And it's just a matter of a different sort of taste. It's a different sort of thing that you're looking at. It's not the Disney thing. It's some other kind of a little bit more edgy. It's what's his name that did Felix the Cat, or
Warner Brothers,
the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, or Warner Brothers, and any number of things. Yeah, Ralph Bakshi was the one I was looking for.
I mean. Yeah, and now that you have your map, you have, like, I would think probably like there's this feeling that now you can make a plan, right? It's like, okay, I've seen, I think mostly everything, and I still haven't made direct progress, but I have some theories now, versus in a LucasArts game, it's like everything that's available to you is always pretty clear at any given time. And that's a fair point. I do think I do fall personally into that trap, because I've always felt like that was that LucasArts was an evolution of and an improvement of this, but there isn't anything to say that one necessarily is better than the other. And again, the Dark Souls examples that I feel like we bring up every single series for some reason is a good example, right? We're returning to that where sort of like that death loop is okay, failing is okay, right? And the sense of discovery of overcoming is actually to some people more valuable and has a bigger impact because you've figured it out on your own versus being handheld. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even just figuring out a way to get around this fact. I mean, this is definitely a brainy game in the sense that you really need to think and analyze and look at that map and make connections that are maybe not supported well in the game itself.
Experiment.
And it also, I mean, an experiment, right? I mean, there's a lot of, I guess you'd say there's a lot of sort of the engineering aesthetic in it as well because of that, right? In that
if then and
yeah, test. Yeah, if I do this, what happens? Let me prod the system and see how it see what results, and that sort of experimentation, I think, is more common to this era, of course, because there's way more programmers in games than there are designers. And as a non-technical person, Roberta Williams is one of the very earliest pure designers, if not the earliest. Because she just looked at at text adventure games and said, "Oh, but this thing can draw pictures. Why aren't we doing that? Why don't these games have pictures?" And of course, I played basically one of her first of those. I think Mystery House was before that, and Wizard of the Princess was second.
Yeah.
So, but that was also a parser game. So I'm familiar with the form. There was just it was all first person. But it was also sort of drawn vector graphics on the Apple II with fills and stuff, with polygon fills. And oh my God, I can't even imagine to make that thing work. Some of the scenes were so elaborate, you could see them being drawn. Yeah. You could watch stuff appear as it drew everything on the screen. So good.
Yeah. Anyway. I didn't play that one, but you sent me some, once you mentioned it, I looked up some of the screenshots and it kind of reminded me of, do you remember Manhole?
No, I don't think I ever
played it was
that
a HyperCard Apple only game that the Cyan, the original, the Myst guys, they made before Myst. It was their game before Myst. It was all black and white, first person, and kind of that, it was made in HyperCard. So it was very simple. But you could see the influence from the Sierra games in it. And then of course Myst was their next thing once they got into CG, and the rest is history. But yeah, it was Manhole. It was like a modern day Alice in Wonderland kind of motif.
I would love to at some point find a couple of decent HyperCard games to play, because that's actually an era where I had drifted away from games. I was in college or about to go to college, and I was busy with other things those couple of years before college, and especially in college, and I missed all of HyperCard.
It was another weird era. Yeah, that kind of was riffing off of this stuff.
I mean, you definitely see HyperCard in Myst, even though it doesn't look like a HyperCard game, but you see the influence.
The structure is.
But the structure is definitely there. So maybe we can find something to pair with Myst, because Myst is kind of short. Yeah, we got to get to it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say some of the, separate from the parser, some of the other things that I've forgotten about with this game, and I already mentioned sort of the sort of literal open worldness of it, which I somehow had kind of forgotten that the structure was so open like that, which is really interesting. But then the other one was that there's some additional, mini mechanics or verbs in the swimming, the jumping, and the crouching, which are things that your character can do, and you need to do in certain cases, which is also another weird kind of merger of some of the other things of the era, right? Like say a little bit of influence of kind of some action stuff in there, though obviously it's not meant to be real action, but it's just this thing that your character, these mechanics your character can do for specific reasons. And in some cases, I think, though I haven't done them yet, I think there's even a timing element.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely not a platformer kind of thing, but Yeah, to give you some
There was
hints.
already a place where I was like, I bet I could jump across these rocks, but I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Oh, yeah, it's not that kind of timing. It's a
Okay.
sort of there's sort of an external variable that comes in that you have to time it. That yeah, so hard. I don't want to spoil it, but
Yeah,
I
no.
mean, as a quick mention for those who don't know, the other really big aspect of these games, because I would never have finished them when I was playing them in the 80s, is the hint books. I don't know if they pioneered this, but one of my fondest memories was ordering those hint books. Of course, I use the hint lines as well, right, in emergencies, but once I got, especially, you can tell in this game, right, that I would have gotten as a kid, I would have gotten stuck really quickly. So I typically would get the hint books, and the way that they had. Did you ever see their hint books? Did you know how that
Never.
worked?
I'm literally searching on the internet now.
Okay, so the way that they did the hint books is it was all invisible ink, and it came with those marker pens that were UV essentially, I believe, and or like black light kind of thing, and you you use the marker over the invisible ink. It's like they had a question, like, do you want the answer to the witch's house? And then you use the marker, and I believe it was in stages. You could color with the invisible ink marker over the answer and only get the first part, and then you could keep coloring to get the next one, and then essentially reveal the answer, so you can flip through the book and not get it spoiled for you. You could only uncover the ones you wanted. So it was literally like one of those invisible ink markers that you used. It was brilliant. I just have this weird, vivid memory of getting those books and scribbling over the ones that I needed. And then, of course, most of the book was scribbled on by the end.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah, they have a whole ton of them at sierragamers.com. So it's a good place to look. They actually have.
I still remember the smell of just the marker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And then they have basically the page that as you would have seen it in the book, and then on the next page they have it as with only the other stuff, only the answers. Because of course so you can't obviously do the marker, but if you flip through this thing, you'll be able to actually just read everything. But
I'll have to go look for those.
Yeah, no, we're taking a look. I'm not gonna use this, but I just wanted to go and see if I could find one. I feel like there was a similar thing with a couple of the Infocom games, maybe like Enchanter.
Oh yeah. They might have done the same thing, yeah. And I don't know if they pioneered this.
No, they didn't have a hint book like this where you color stuff. They would ask. It was more straight ahead, and I actually have some of those because they were published in a collection called The Lost Treasures of Infocom, and I bought both sets of those. So Activision,
those huge
Activision, you're welcome. Things? Yes.
Oh yeah, those were cool.
Yeah, and they had all the materials that had been published in the books and all these hint guides and things like that. But they were similar in the way that they sort of teased out information. Basically, you'd get a level of a hint, and then if you wanted more, you could find the next level of that hint, and not instead of just telling you, which is so much of how we play games today, that you just sort of are told. You go and look it up, and all first choice is eliminated, right? So
that's how I use friends now. You know what I mean? Like, I'll ask them, don't tell me the answer, but can you give me a cool clue? People who have played the game before, that's my strategy these days. But then the other part of it, that because I was at Lucas, we were both at Lucas at the time, and there was still some of it going on, we had a whole hint line department.
Yeah, exactly.
Phone department, right? And so you'd call and I still know some of these people, where you'd talk to a person and you could ask them and they would try to give you an appropriate clue, right? Without giving it away, like verbally, which is just insane. That's just more.
Yeah,
those days are over.
Right. Well, not entirely. So as a side note, and I don't know if I mentioned it on the cast last week, but I know I've mentioned it on the stream. I DM'd a Dungeons and Dragons game
Oh yeah,
for the first time in well over a decade this past weekend. And in fact, I did two separate sessions with two different groups, all of my son's friends, which was more than a little stressful. But the same things will happen there, right? You have a real person that you can ask weird questions of, well, could I do this? And that person will say, well, I don't know that would be helpful here. Let me tell you, explain my reasoning, right? And it was like that, calling a hint line.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And
a pen and paper long
exactly. And I think a lot of these sorts of folks would have been pen and paper players for sure. So
oh yeah. So all the different ways, I'm looking at some of my notes, all the different ways to die. We should talk a little bit about sort of some of what I wanted to hit was some of sort of the meta rules of the game and the world, things like death and game over screens, right? And some of the MIDI music and such, like, man, talk about flashbacks when I started playing. Even just the green sleeves opening.
Oh yeah, I picked up on that for sure.
It's just like, oh my, I remember
something
this.
I probably could have played on my UU, my Ultima Underworld mandolin.
Oh yeah,
I didn't even think about green sleeves. That's definitely a major key.
But then and you already mentioned falling in the moat right away, which is, I think, a fond memory for anyone who's ever played this game, to be honest, because of the, I was going to ask you about sort of how they dealt with collision and things like that, walk boxes and such, I assume, or how do they
almost
deal
certainly
with...
it was a walk box. Almost certainly.
Yeah.
I don't know how else you would do it. And I don't.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, there may have been some overlap with the structures that they used, but
well, then the funny thing
is it's pretty accurate, believe it or not.
It is, yeah. It seems pixel perfect in most cases, but then, like those bridges in the moat, it's painted with a perspective and depth, and so your brain tells you that depth is there,
right?
But the walk box is literal, so it's easy to walk off. So it's like, it's such a funny first screen for any game because it's so easy for you, so it's like, talking about barrier of entry, like the first screen, almost everyone is going to fall.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the first thing you're going to want to do. And it's totally weird because, and especially going back over it, it's like once you get to the point where the curve basically disappears, where the curve of the bridge hides the ramp off, and you're basically stepping right onto the grass from basically top of the bridge, more or less. Maybe you've declined a little bit, but yeah, it's a pretty weird, it's pretty surreal. It's just a strange thing.
Well, and it's that willing suspension of disbelief,
right?
For this era,
right?
It's like, well, it's like, yeah, well, that was it. But then, I made those assumptions all over again for a modern era, and then forgot. Yeah, oh yeah, that's right. I remember having to remember not to walk over here.
Exactly. I fell in coming from the west back to the castle. I fell into that moat like 4 times.
Yeah. Again, yeah. And then the moat is right there when you come onto the screen, which is also terrible usability. So it's like all this, but then you realize in the level design of the world, if you can even call it that, the screen directly below the castle needs, let's see, what's the one right below is an inaccessible area, I believe. And so they wouldn't want you to be able to go directly south from the castle because you can't get to that screen yet.
Right.
I believe. So it's like,
go west.
They needed the moat. Yeah. They needed the moat to be fully encompassing the southern part of the screen. So it's just weird little things like that are just so funny. But then so then we kind of talked about the depth.
The other actual thing about the map that surprised me, and this is part of why my map is so broken, is that it just wraps around.
Yeah, right.
It's exactly. A very small world. My expectation had been, and I don't know if I got this expectation from Wizard and the Princess, but I feel like I did. But my expectation had been, I will walk west, and then ultimately at some point I won't be able to walk west anymore. And instead, what I found as I played the game more and more, this was another kind of big surprise for me, was, oh, wait a minute, I've been going north and I'm back to someplace I've seen before. That shouldn't be possible. And it turns out it basically has Pac-Man world, right? It's I mean, it's not.
The Earth is round.
Yeah, right? Exactly. But it's, I don't know how you describe that, but because it's not a sphere. Because it just wraps. You just basically teleport, I guess. But it's a logical world and not. I mean, a connected world, I should say. Maybe not a logical world because people might not find that word logical. But and it's just connected, and it's connected left and right and top and bottom.
Yeah, and once you know that, it's logical, but it doesn't make sense right away, of course. Yeah, but I don't. It'd be interesting. I don't know if we'll ever know the answer, but that does seem like a usability decision. Hard to say whether it was that intentional or not. But if you can imagine having to walk all the way across, there were moments when I appreciated the wraparound because it would allowed me to get to where I needed to go to more quickly, based on the next step versus having to, be at one edge of the world and because he walks so damn slow, having to walk all the way across the world again to go do a thing. So they could have, the object placement could have been better to solve that problem, but I definitely appreciated the wraparound. So I often wondered if that was just very intentional for, because you're saying in the Wizard and the Princess it did not wrap around?
I don't think it did, but there
could have been a lesson learned.
Well, the parser was all the movement as well. So you would type west and you just go to the next screen. Right. So it was just and it may have even allowed shortcuts,
right? Zork didn't. Zork was just a discrete.
Right.
Path,
Zork didn't wrap around either. No. So I think just because you could type in probably just just EWNS if you wanted to go in those directions, you just didn't have to. Didn't have to worry about that stuff. There's one key to move the screen, and here it's you're traipsing about. So yeah, definitely a whole thing.
The interesting thing is I don't think the rest of them do it. I feel like it becomes more of a real world, and I don't think Space Quest does it either.
I don't think Space Quest does it. I played, maybe not Space Quest 1, I don't know. I did play a bit of Space Quest 4, and I know that that's a very different sort of game.
But I mean, that's, even one that, was the same era essentially.
We'll find out in a couple weeks.
Yeah. The other one that I wanted to mention that I had forgotten about and was surprised by is an interesting, I'm mixed about it. It's cool that they did it, and I definitely didn't remember this, but multi-use and multi-solution objects and puzzles. So I don't know if you ran into any of this, but to give you an example.
So far, I have I found the golden egg, I found a golden walnut, I found a ceramic bowl, and I found something else, one other thing I can't immediately remember. A four-leaf clover. I have not figured out how to use any of them.
Okay.
I've got a long way to go.
So. Well, I won't spoil too much. But there's a couple items. Well, there's at least one item that you can use in a couple different circumstances, but only one of them is really what you need to use it for. And I was surprised by that because it kind of throws you off, right? You think that, and I think it is the case with most objects. There's a discrete purpose and only one purpose. Mm-hmm. But this one object that I was like, I wonder if I can do this with it. And then I could, and it has nothing to do with the actual solution for that object or puzzle. And so I was surprised by that. And then there's also, have you gotten to the troll on the bridge yet or seen him? You must have.
Right? Yeah, the ogre or whatever. Yeah, the troll. Yeah. The ogre is a different thing.
Ogre is a different thing. Yeah, the troll. I definitely didn't remember this, but there's actually two solutions to the troll that I did not know. And I was surprised by that too. And then the other rule that is a weird mechanic of its era for sure is this concept of time and waiting for things to happen.
Yeah.
That
I've already discovered because I got touched by the sorcerer.
Yeah.
Froze me.
Yeah,
and you're just sitting there.
Just sitting there. The weirdest decision, but it's like it's so discreet.
It's like you go to see a stand-up comedian and he goes up and he tells a joke and then he just stands there for a couple minutes. You're like, but there's supposed to be more jokes. I'm not enjoying myself. And then and then he keeps going. That was like that. What that was? I was laughing at how silly it was. Yeah, it was such a strange moment. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and I know that she bases a lot of these early games on fairy tales, and in fact, she says that in the manual. And I'm just like racking my brain because that's a long time ago for me. I haven't read a fairy tale in a while.
There's some preconceived notions that she assumes you have for some of the solutions and concepts for how to solve certain things. The troll is a good example. I won't spoil anything, but the troll is a good example of trolls and bridges and and the particular nursery rhymes that go with that concept is at least one of the solutions to that. But but the waiting one was just a funny one because it's just such a foreign concept, I think, today.
Yeah.
To some degree, it happens in some genres, but and not only in this game, but it's actually something that continues in the series. I remember vividly, it may be in 2 or 3. I think it might be 3, but there's a kind of pretty famous loop that happens in that game that's all about just timing and waiting. Literally, you're just waiting for the right opportunity and you have to do it in a certain way. And the same thing that I forgot about, it happens in this game in a couple different places, unfortunately for you.
Boy.
Yeah. And I've had to refresh my memory in a couple things. At the end of the evening last night, I was like, did I actually fail when I chose to do this one thing? I think I did because I needed to know because I wanted to start over if I did. And it turns out I did. So I don't know if I want to spoil it for you, but I'll talk about it next time. Some hilarious moments, like again, with just a few pixels can create hilarity of failure by just one false move, not just in falling, but just like, I just cut that and now I can't. No.
I did this thing in the wrong order. Yeah. Well, no, and again, it definitely feels like it is a game that you are meant to experiment with. And when you realize that you've done something badly, I mean, I was saving and restoring frequently last night just to like, okay, well, I have that part of the map. Let me go and, because I'd die or I'd get to a place and I'd be like, well, never mind. I'll just I tried to jump over the river and instead I fell in and I was drowning. I'm like, well, I'll just go back. That's fine. I don't need to start over. I'll just save from a few screens ago, and now I know what those screens are. That's all I really needed to know at that point. But I know I have a lot more game to play at this point. Let's put a pin in it there, and return to the specifics of the game next week when I'll have played a lot more and hopefully finished it. And I know it'll be a little bit easier. This will be one of those games that's actually a lot easier for you to play. Because
for sure.
I mean, it's if I can keep away from cheating. I may not be able to because I'm on a deadline.
Yeah, so. I mean, you should try, but I don't think it's gonna, dude. I just don't think it's gonna be possible. Like even I actually second guessed myself on a couple things that I thought I remembered and I was completely wrong on, and so I've already cheated on a couple things, to be honest. So
God, that makes me so much more want to just power through.
No, hey, if you do it, I will. I mean, like I said, you should try, and badge of honor if you succeed at it. I will be amazed, though. I will totally be amazed. So it's not a challenge. I'm not saying.
I used to play a lot of these games, but it has been a long time. So it's a lot of the text adventures anyway. So, but it has been a long time, and it's a tough.
And it's the killers. There's no teaching, right? Yep, and like I said, there's certain verbs that you use, I think, like once, and so it's this weird experimentation where you're like, you have to put kind of logic of, well, I should be able to do this, so I guess I'll try it, and then it worked, huh?
Yeah,
who knew?
You'll never do that again. That's weird.
Yeah,
so weird.
Good luck.
Yep, thank you. All right, well let's go ahead and call it there. We have no reviews nor email to read this week, so it's just us. So we'll just give you the places to put that stuff. Of course, we look forward to reading your reviews in the Apple Podcasts app. I'm subscribed to RSS feeds from all over the world. But if you do happen to write one and we don't get it by next week, then just ping the email and let me know, and I'll go track down your country of origin. Of course, you can send your questions and comments to devgameclub@gmail.com. You can find the podcast on Twitter at devgameclub. You can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
I've been streaming games recently at twitch.tv/Brett Duville, including this one. And for Lucas Rizzoli, I am putting up my Ultima Underworld playlist once I have it all downloaded. So all of that will be on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. And once that's up, probably by next week, I'll let you know. I just wanted to make sure I could get it all before I put it up.
This must be a weird game to watch you play.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly we chat more than anything else. I'm not taking any hints yet. I took a lot more hints in Ultima Underworld because I knew it was a longer game, but we'll see how that goes.
This is hilarious. I love it.
So it's been interesting. Anyway, for next week, we're going to finish this game in theory, and then we'll turn to Space Quest the week after that, and we're basically going to do two weeks of this game. And 2 weeks of Space Quest, and kind of cover their two major franchises. Leisure Suit Larry is pretty popular one as well, but I've never played one of those either. I think I'll pass. I don't know that it would fit with my ability anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe when I was younger, but certainly not now. And Police Quest either, for that matter.
Those are definitely both two weird franchises, and Leisure Suit just, in this day and age is just not.
Yeah, not really. Hasn't kept up with modern sensibility, we'll say. But
yeah, Police Quest is interesting though. Just as a quick aside, because it was really focused on police procedure.
Yes,
I don't know if you knew that, but
I did know. Well, there was recently an article, and I put it in the show notes, about Police Quest 4 in particular, which was notably a bit controversial because of the involvement of Daryl Gates, who was head of the LAPD.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And it led to a really messed up sort of LAPD from which the city is still recovering, really. That relationship between those police and the citizens they patrol is really still not very healthy. And a lot of that is down to Daryl Gates. It goes back further than that, certainly, but he was a modern incarnation of some really ugly stuff, including the Rodney King riots. So,
weird,
really weird. But I'll track that down and put that link in the show. I read in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, it talks a lot about the history of the series because the first three had worked with a highway patrol officer to come up with what the procedures would be and try to make it really logical and like you do this, and
it was all based on
the game where you failed. And, oh my god, just
and you had to use all of the terminology on the radio correctly. Like the different number,
like 10-4
coding, 10-4, but then like a homicide and a robbery, those all have their own specific numbers and codes. You had to use those. You had to walk around your car completely and check all the tires and before getting into it.
Oh my god!
Because that's what police have to do before they leave, and if you didn't walk all the way around, you'd fail. So
police and people who rent cars.
Exactly. Yeah. Just it's such a anyway.
What a weird thing. All right. Well, in the meantime, then I guess we'll call it here. And so therefore, sir, I will say good night.
Good night.